companies doing like 2, 3, 4 million in revenue, they don't have sophisticated system. What is one thing I can do as an action point, let's say, to get better?
The price has to be right, but there has to be another motivator for the customer to pick you, and create processes that make you the best or the most efficient at something.
Cheapest is not always the best deal, right? If you're getting something below market, there is a reason behind that.
Price is here and expected cost is here. The difference is margin. But if you can drop your actual cost, you've grown margin as a result. And maybe the smarter answer is, you know what, maybe I stayed the same size from a sales perspective, but I fired my lowest performing customer.
Why do most 3PL actually not know the real service cost to a client?
At its core, it's about communication.
Sometimes we don't know to ask the questions. Sometimes we assume too much and we're wrong. Pricing can't react to attribute changes, or you don't have a way to notice them if they do occur. And that's, again, how we lose as providers.
Welcome everyone to Execution at Scale. Thank you for joining in. As you know, this is episode 2, pricing that destroys margin before you actually even notice it. So essentially, this series I started because I felt like most conversations in this industry happen in hallways and over coffee and not actually on the stage. So essentially just trying to change that a little bit. And today I have Bob with me. And me and Bob have had multiple conversations about pricing. Bob has over 15 years of experience building and refining pricing structures across Kenco, Ryder, Stored, all the big names you have heard about. To give back to the community, he also teaches a course at IWLA, which is called Economics of Warehousing course, which is actually coming up, which we'll share details in the end too, which I believe, and I got a glimpse of that back in January, just a 2-hour summary, and it was definitely best 2 hours I ever spent learning about pricing for warehousing and 3PL. So I hope you guys will learn something and enjoy from it. And Bob, welcome. Thanks again for volunteering to come on this. As you know that I'm a new host, so I might mess up, but I appreciate you volunteering for it. And anything you would like to add on about yourself? I just wanted to give a brief intro and let you add anything before we kind of dive into asking questions.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I did enjoy the conversation we got to have in Long Beach not too long ago at the Essentials class. And as you mentioned, I do have an annual Economics of Warehousing class coming up in October. It'll be in Chicago this year. And that's a 2.5-day class where a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, I would imagine, are topics that come up in the class. As 3PLs, we all kind of face the same. The way I look at it is we all have limited resources, but we all have unlimited wants and needs. And in pricing, one of the wants and needs that you have are about managing and protecting margin. And there are ways that you can protect your company, protect their revenue and their margin in the methods used for pricing, but also kind of the level of communication your pricing team has with sales and operations, so that you're essentially not putting too much burden on your operations to do something that maybe isn't possible for the price that you quoted. So it certainly gets deep. And like you mentioned, we could probably talk about this for more than just hours. But hopefully today we'll shed some light on maybe the biggest issues and the causes that I've noticed over 30 years that make pricing problems a reality.
For sure, I totally agree with you, right? Right before this session, we thought we can go on for 3 hours, and now we know we have only an hour. So, but that makes it good, right? People will want to come to the actual course, which is like a 3-day. It's a 3-day event, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 2.5. Yeah.
Yeah, 2.5. Yeah, I'll be there, so looking forward to it. But great. So first of all, before I go into everything, I'm little bit curious to understand what made a pricing to be your specialty, right? You started in different careers and everything. So what made pricing in this industry so intrigued, you wanted to go deep on?
Yeah. I also have a guest in the back if you see him walking around a little bit.
I locked mine out so that because he's a small puppy and he would be jumping on me.
Yeah. It would be worse if I locked him out. So, I think like many people, at least, so my career in logistics started 30 years ago. I'm 31 now. And it was by accident. My undergrad's in psychology, and I started my career in human resources. And not to go too deep into my history, but my first logistics job, I had applied to be an HR manager in a brand new Walmart distribution center. And through the interview process, I was offered a job as a traffic manager at a startup. And away I went, abandoning human resources, but caring about the people, right? Um, and just started focusing on either starting it. First 15 years of my career, either starting up, closing down, or transitioning departments or full distribution centers for some of America's largest retailers, like you mentioned. And then about 16 years ago, I had an opportunity to join a 3PL, and it was to do pricing because that's what their need was at that moment, but also to do sales because they had a need there as well. So I kind of wore two hats in the small 3PL many years ago. And after getting an MBA and wanting to kind of exploit that new set of skills, I also decided that I wanted to be a specialist, not a generalist. So I didn't think I could be great at two things. And it was a conscious decision to be great at one thing, if you will. That was my pursuit, at least. And I picked pricing. And when I got into pricing, my company sent me to the economics of warehousing and the essentials class. And I
Oh,
was the guy in the front row asking the most questions. Like my life depended on it, because it literally did, with 3 young kids and a young family, basically transitioning from operations to pricing, which was new. Um, I had to be great to support my family. And I think that was kind of the push into taking the deep dive that I've taken in pricing. And my career has led me down some pretty broad aspects of pricing. So I think I've kind of attacked it at all sides. Um, and yeah, so that's where it came from. And that's why it's still important to me to this day. And, 26 years later, 30
yeah,
years, 31 years later.
oh wow, amazing. 31 years. Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, I totally agree with you. And like pricing is like so complex, especially when it comes to 3PL. And like, having a speciality in it is like wonderful, right? Like I feel wonderful because like, we get to learn a lot, I guess. Like maybe because of that. I don't know how much fun it is, but yeah. So like, going right into it, then like, given all your experiences and like, again, obviously like while teaching for all the courses, you're also like having a lot of these conversations with like, small to mid-sized 3PLs. That's what like kind of the target audience of IWLA is. So tell me like what are the most common pricing mistakes which you have seen 3PLs make when they're growing?
Yeah. So, the mistakes we make and how they kind of maybe multiply when you're a growing operation, it's just like anything else. I think where volume tends to call out small issues because they've been magnified just by the volume, right? I mean, in operations, if your picking operation is um, if you expect a certain task to take place in 30 seconds and it takes 35 seconds, well, you kind of forgive the fact that it's, 20% over because it's only 6 seconds, 5 seconds. But when you go from 100 orders a day to 1,000 orders a day, now that problem's 10 times worse. And that margin drain is 10 times bigger. What you could tolerate in the single digit dollars, maybe now you can't tolerate when it's in the tens and hundreds of dollars, and it only gets worse from there. I've heard people say that it's kind of the death by 1,000 cuts. No one thing that you did when you got a new customer at any size was the fatal flaw, but everything kind of compounds. And here's 2 things I'll say that I think are maybe easy to remember. One is customers have a tendency to overconsume the item they believe you've underpriced. And really what that means is customers try to find outsized value for their money, right? So if they believe you're cheap with storage, they're going to store a lot of stuff in your building. If they believe you're cheap with handling, they might give you a lot of special projects. And if that was an unintentional pricing decision, it's going to be overused by your customer. They're going to take advantage of where they find extraordinary value. And if that extraordinary value doesn't build additional margin for you, you're just signing up for making a customer relationship worse for you and better for them, which isn't helping.
Wow, like that's such a wonderful way to put it, and it reminded me of a story. But like I would just like to highlight this more. Like as you said that anything which you underprice, people will overutilize. Like that's like probably like I'll probably make a T-shirt which would say that, and I'll wear that to economics course. But like that just reminded me real quick that so there was this customer. This was back in like 2018, like when I started, right? So there was this 3PL, and they had a customer, nothing wrong. But what I realized, like they were getting a lot of rush orders. And when I said like okay, like okay, like getting 2 or 3 rush orders, and the total order volume was not a lot, and there was only one customer who was doing that, like almost every order was rush order. So that means like if their cutoff is noon for the order to be processed the same day, they are sending in orders at like 12:31 and saying, hey, like this needs to go out today, kind of thing. And I was like, okay, like do you have rush fee added to your contract? No, right? I said, okay, like you should add it. I mean, it's okay. Like you're giving a service which is rushed service. It is very normal to charge for it. There was a little bit back and forth with their client, but they agreed to it. Guess what? 3 months, no rush order. So that like
Yeah.
that is like a very small thing, right? Like but the thing is like as you said, like once they grow, like these things will keep on multiplying because the client of the 3PL can think that okay, this is just normal, right? So definitely. And yeah, like that code, like it distracted me a little bit because I was like so right on point.
Well, I have another one for you. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
pepper it in later. But, I'll tell you that, on the surface, pricing, I think we tend to think about pricing is, I know I've got a cost. I know I want to make a profit. If I understand my cost and I throw some money on top of that, that should tell me my price. And that's sometimes where companies stop. If I want to make 20% and my cost is $1, then my markup is 20%. I'll sell for $1.20. And then what they don't realize though is you can also use pricing to drive behavior. To your point, when something's free, there's no limit to how much they're going to consume. But when they are forced to decide, is the value of a rush order worth $15, $50, $5 million? Then it starts to drive behavior. And it really says, if you're going to make me break from my standard process to do something special for you, I need to be compensated. In the essence of the topic of our conversation today, that is really where we lose, is when we're not compensated for the work we actually do, when it differs from what we thought the customer needed when we signed the contract.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And like, honestly, like this would apply in pretty much any industry as well. This is like,
Yeah.
I believe, like business 101 that, like, to your point, like, that is like so much accurate. I cannot emphasize that more, but I'll get away from it and go to the next ask for you. So, like, which kind of like dives into like what you just said, right? Like, there are also a lot of like hidden costs as well, right? Like, which sometimes we cannot know. Some things, like, we know that we are actually doing but not being paid for, and we think okay, like it is kind of compensated for in our other pricing structure too, right? So why do like most 3PL actually not know the real service cost to a client, right? Like what is the biggest reason that they are not able to know it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at its core, it's about communication between the new customer and the service provider. Sometimes we don't know to ask the questions. Sometimes we assume too much and we're wrong. Sometimes we get a false sense of confidence from the data that we get from a prospect, and we don't set up, most often the real reason is we don't set up a mechanism that can identify scope creep from when we proposed pricing for a certain set of expectations, and then a year later go back and say, is this all we're doing for this customer or has it changed? And that scope creep may be unintentional and it may be intentional. It may be just a factor of how that customer has grown their own business. It changed what they need from you and you didn't identify it, and either your pricing can't react to what I would call attribute changes, or you don't have a way to notice them if they do occur. And that's again how we lose as providers.
Yeah, and absolutely. And that is one thing which, I always felt was very strange, early in my career, when I was kind of vetting 3PLs for the brands I was working with. Uh, it was let's say there is a 3PL, 10 to 30 minutes apart from each other. Everyone has a different pricing. And this was one of the things, you actually talked about in, in January in Long Beach too. And I was able to resonate with it a lot that sometimes as a customer of 3PL we are kind of chasing them, oh, your storage is fine, but the other company next door is $2 less on picking, right? Or vice versa, whatever it could be, the whole combination. And that is where I was like, okay, it doesn't make sense, one of them is doing it wrong. But if you're talking to five or six companies in a general area, all of them having it wrong, different, I would not say wrong or right, raise some concerns, right? If you're a little bit off, that's different. But if someone is charging $8 for storage and the other one is charging uh $12 or $18, that's a big difference. That's almost double, three times. And when you compare the other charges, right? So that kind of resonates with what you just said. Knowing the actual cost is, I guess that's where I'm trying to just pick your brain a little bit more. That is it more they don't know their real cost, or they don't know how to price it? What's the whole mix here, right?
Yeah, so I think there's two things here, and one thing I want to make kind of clear up front is, in my opinion, and it's more than just my opinion, but one thing I want to make clear is pricing, for the most part, is set by the market. What customers are willing to pay and what your operation costs you to execute, they might seem similar. I say that they're cousins, they're not married. Okay. So, and what that means is, you might say the cost to provide a service is X and I want to make 20%. So X plus 20 could be my price, right? And so in that way, we start to think that cost and price are related. I say they're not. I say the price is what the customer is willing to pay. The cost is as low as you're able to get it, based on the nature of your operation, your specialty, your differentiator. So, number one, when you see different prices from different providers in the same market, to me, the signal isn't always they don't know their cost. It's they know how bad they want to win the next deal. And one thing I've always said, maybe not t-shirt worthy, is those of us that are hungry will always lose to those of us that are desperate. So think of it like this. Two providers across the street from each other. One company's building is nearly full. And if he takes on another customer and forces this congestion and potentially overtime issue and all these other unknowns, it's basically a burden on his company to take the business. If he's going to take it, he's going to make it worth his while. The other guy across the street just lost an anchor tenant that took half his space with him, and now he's got a half empty building. And this opportunity comes along, and I'm telling him I'll need $12 a pallet. And the guy that's got half empty building says, heck, I'll get it. I'll do it for $8. Just help me pay the rent. And we perceive the value of those two different providers differently. The costs are probably the same. The desperation versus the hunger is what reveals itself in the price.
I mean, that is such a right point. And what I also feel is especially when we are in this small to mid-sized space, like we get so many brands who are new as well, right? Like, they're not like bigger brands doing like millions or billions in revenue. So like, this could be like, hey, I like, I have a cute dog, let me start like, a dog product company. I started, boom, like, I'm doing $5 million revenue a year. I want a 3PL. Now I go to a 3PL, I know nothing about 3PL space. It was funny, like I used this example in the last episode too, but like, that will probably remain the prime example, in at least like which I have seen. So there was this lady like working as a front desk receptionist, and like she had a cat and she could not find a cat toothbrush. So she started a cat toothbrush company, which became really good. Now she wants a 3PL. Now when a person like this is negotiating or talking to a 3PL, right, like nothing wrong in it. The problem is like they don't really know that same example, right? Like they don't know that, okay, like if I'm trying to store a pallet in California, bare minimum my cost should be, let's say, like $20 for storage, right? And if someone is quoting me like 12, there is something there, right? Like I can take advantage of it for a short time, because not only I believe it, like what are your thoughts on, like, because when things like these happen, not only it affects like the 3PL, but I think it also affects their customers and brands, right? Because sometimes they are not able to base their costing of fulfillment, etc., based on real numbers, and indirectly that is not setting them for success. What are your thoughts on that? Have you seen any examples around that as well?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, and I'm actually going through that right now. Um,
Oh,
so yeah, I mean, in a slightly different way, but um, in my example, uh, we're transitioning some customers to a different building, and the cost structure is different in that new building. But we also don't want that newer, bigger building to sit vacant, so we're kind of offering, you know, kind of a introductory offer. We're considering an introductory offer price. We'll keep your price the same. Just move into our new empty building. That price is below market for the new location. Um, but it serves our needs, right? It gets them out of a full building, gets them into an empty building. From a contribution margin perspective, it's the right thing for us to do. The problem is if I'm charging them $1 a foot and the market is $2 a foot, how do I ever get them back up to market? Do I double their prices after the intro? Do I slowly give them 10% increases over 10 plus years? I finally give the market. Um, and the other thing is once they, there's like that anchoring mindset that now this space is worth $1. Never mind that it's two, you're selling it to me for $1. Um, and if they ever wanted to, let's just say the customer says, wow, for $1 a foot, I'll give you, I'll triple my need there. Well, I can't accept triple his volume at that same bargain basement price. So now he feels like, a business plan he had for his storage cost to be X has just doubled. And now I'm the bad guy for making his business plan unrealistic. And I think that's not uncommon. Um, I've got customers now that are on old contracts that I'm renewing, and they never thought this day would come. They haven't planned for it. What do you mean we're going to increase my rates? It's been 6 years.
exactly. And like, that is where I believe, like, not only like, for us in the like, actual 3PL industry, but even like people who are customers of 3PL should be aware about all these things. And I hope like some of these conversations reach out to them as well, because necessarily like cheapest is not always the best deal, right? Like, if you're getting something below market, there is a reason behind that. And I don't think like it is smart to utilize it for the shorter period, right? Like if I have a 3-year 5-year contract, but I would want to build that into my pricing at the end. I know like we are deviating from 3PL a little bit here, but it is like all related, right? Like, I believe that, because if your customer is not being able to like, is not able to survive after 3 5 years because you double their pricing, that's another challenge for you. Now you have that empty space you need to fill, right? Like, it goes hand in hand. And I believe like, a lot of 3PL providers are also taking initiative to educate their customers, right? Like, which I believe is very good, and that is where it adds on that value for sure. And so also like, switching gears here a little bit, like one thing which I believe, like, again, like we all know 3PL pricing is complex, right? Like we cannot to emphasize more on it. But let's say I anticipate, okay, like, I'm doing these activities. And like right now I'm talking about a general scenario that, okay, I'm doing like picking, storing, these are the pallets, all that. I anticipate, okay, my cost is going to be X, Y, and Z for each activity, like you said. And then obviously, like, there are a lot of like filler activities as well, right? Like, let's say I'm going to pick something, I have to get a cart. I saw this interesting post on LinkedIn just yesterday that they said that, okay, there was a pallet, right? Like, which is kept all the way on the other side of the building. Now, like, someone needs to go get it. Like, a lot of those times and everything. So I guess, like, do you think like visibility is also a problem? Like, for example, like if as a 3PL I priced a certain thing based on certain assumptions, like how do I actually know that my assumptions were accurate or not, even if I took everything into account, what was my actual cost and what I ended up charging the customer? Like, how do you see these three things converge? Like, do people don't have tools for it, or is it more like they just think that, okay, like putting a 20-30% margin on top of everything is fine? Like, what are your thoughts on this whole
Yeah.
convergence?
So I think I think 3PLs need to understand um, the cost that they will incur to to serve a customer, but they also need to understand how those true costs might differ from the costs that were modeled in the pricing um, for that new customer in the first place. And what I mean by that is, here's a great example, very common example. If I thought I was very sophisticated when I learned that um, the square root of the area of a building is equal to the drive from the corner to the middle of the building. Like that is, I may have gotten the details wrong by now because I've abandoned this concept, but I was very
No,
proud of myself.
that seems right to me, because yeah, like yeah, that seems right. Yeah, because of the it's math
Yeah.
essentially, nothing
So
to
I
do
was
with.
very proud of myself by saying, well, if they tell me the building's 200 by 500 and I do the square root, then that resulting number is my average drive distance and I can calculate a drive speed. I even took it to the point where I was adding lifts and lowers, he starts and stops and mounts and dismounts and turns, and whether or not the forklift was vectoring. I thought I really went deep into what is the time it takes to do a put away or a replenishment or a pallet pick. If every put away and every pick is based on going to the hypothetical middle of the building. So
Mhm.
for every account in total, that math is true. But if you take on your newest customer and
Yep.
the only space left in your building is in the southeast corner and your receiving docks in the northwest corner, every put away is going to take 20 minutes or literally more than twice as long as you anticipated. Um, and the customer that's in the same corner, the southeast corner, the same corner as your receiving dock, their drives, instead of the hypothetical 5 minutes, are going to take 1 minute. And so that account, if all account volume is equal, that account, because its drives are shorter, but the price for a put away is the same, or an inbound pallet, that account, if you're tracking labor in your WMS properly, will seem profitable because they beat the clock on every put away. Where my new customer that I have a twice as long of a drive, 10 minutes instead of 5 to go to the way back, is going to lose on the P&L from a labor standpoint because I'm spending more than the pricing allows. But in general, the whole building, it probably averages itself out. Then we can get into weighing between, fast movers in the front, slow movers in the back, and should you move customers and all those things. And those are ways to kind of beat the time you're allotted in the calculation, right? So in my theory, if you're allowed 5 minutes for a put away or a pallet pick, and most of your activity comes from a customer on the way back, you owe it to yourself to move that customer to the front. So you are beating the 5 minute allowance more often than not, right? And that's how you kind of gain your own system to make how your productivity is measured and how your pricing is based, make it work to your advantage. And that's kind of, we all know that we should minimize drive time, but it all impacts, cost. And the greater your cost, the lower your margin, right? So to me, this is another, maybe not t-shirt worthy, but price is here and expected cost is here. The difference is margin. But if you can drop your actual cost, you've grown margin as a result. So I always talked about that communication earlier with operations. I always want pricing and solutions to know what's possible. And I always want operations going back and telling solutions and pricing what is possible in a realistically optimized environment, so that I can price based on that kind of better reality than my hypothetical model might otherwise tell me.
Yeah, I cannot appreciate that more. I come from a process improvement background, and I always feel like, what you just explained, like getting, like, your cost down, like, consistently is one of the keys, definitely. And being able to track, like, like you mentioned, like, we can do as many estimations as we want, but there could be a lot of variabilities. Like, to your example, like, a new customer, the only place open is like Southeast, right? Like, very typical and very common. So, so switching gears a little bit more here, like, going to, like, let's imagine, like, there's a 3PL owner listening to us who is like around like that 5-10 million revenue mark and doing fine, but, like, now he's in a span of growing, adding another location, and they don't have, like, a lot of like true cost. They don't have a specialist like you there, and he does not have time to come to economics of warehousing, right? So if you have like 5 to 10 minutes to tell him that, okay, like, these are the things you can at least look at while you get time to come to, like, IWLA next year, like, for economics of warehousing, what would you tell him? Like, what are some things someone can take, some small actions which will help them at least get one step ahead? I would not say closer to perfection, but one step ahead of where they would be typically.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a thousand answers to that question, but a couple of points that come to mind initially are that you have to have an awareness of how your fixed costs are going to change when you're forced into an expansion. So let's just say that you're in a 100,000 square foot building now that's 90% full, and a customer or a prospect comes along that says they need 20,000 feet. Your reality is 20,000 feet when you got capacity for 10 means you've got to get a second building. So if you got another identical building, winning this customer means you've got one full building and one building 10% full. And it's not realistic to think that you're going to cover the rent in that second building with one customer covering 10% of the cost. So I think there needs to be a awareness and a preparation for what can I do to avoid the step up in fixed costs as long as possible. And it might, growth sounds good on paper, but in this example, if I had two options to take on a 20,000 square foot customer when I've only got 10,000 square feet available, is take on a second building and run the model to see how long it's going to take until I break even, or how many square feet do I need occupied at the market rate until I'm covering costs. And maybe the smarter answer is, maybe I stay the same size from a sales perspective, but I fire my lowest performing customer and create 20,000 square feet for a higher margin customer. And having that, and your system could help you with this if your P&L doesn't, is you could have a profitability by customer list that basically puts, targets on the backs of your lowest margin performing customers. The first worst customer is empty space, right? But once you fire that empty space customer by someone paying for some space, for the most part, the customer with the lowest margin, if you can replace them with a higher margin customer, that's a win, without the risk of a second building and a second 5-year lease or whatever the case may be. Now possibly second general manager, on $500,000 in startup costs to wire and stripe and, rack a second building. So I think it's just an awareness of, what do I really want to do? Do I want to grow? Is revenue my motivator? Is it margin? If I can make 20% in a small building versus losing 10% by having two buildings, which is better? So again, pricing is a management decision based on the market, but it could be a management decision based on company goals. If you want 2 buildings, go get 2 buildings, but be aware of what it's going to take until you turn profitable. The other, and if it's not about growing, it's about maximizing margin, then there's other avenues.
Yeah, for sure. And like, like you said, there could be 100 examples. I mean, like if they're adding just like, a customer with 20,000 square foot, like they can try to like, find a 4PL opportunity nearby or something for the time they try to like, expand it to have like at least 70, 80,000 square feet covered and then get a new building. And I think like, one of the challenges which I generally have seen is that a lot of people are like, don't have like necessary like models around it, right? Like is there something you would like, what I'm trying to get at is like, one of the Excel file, for example, you showed in like, as an example, at like, in Long Beach. So what I was wondering was like, a lot of the systems, like when we look at like companies doing like 2, 3, 4 million in revenue, they don't have sophisticated systems, right? Like they cannot pay like $100,000, let's say, for a WMS or like, anything around that. Like, so what would you say, like what are some, are there any tools available to your knowledge, like, which can help them like in that early phase, like, maybe like I don't know if IWL shares like, some Excel templates. Like I'm just like, throwing this out of the blue. Like I don't know if there's anything like which helps them like at least to understand and assess like fixed cost, variable cost, all that kind of stuff. Like because I also feel like that is also a missing thing, like, which exists out there.
Yeah, I don't believe it exists either, and that's actually we find that a lot of the people that come to the class every year, and we get about 50 people to the 3-day class, about 80 people to the essentials where I have a 3-hour segment. They are looking for a model that they can just take home and plug in. And the reality is one doesn't exist. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And it probably could be solved easily by someone that's, business minded and could make something marketable. What I have found is that each of us has developed a tool that serves our own needs and has grown to serve the changing needs of our business on a case by case basis. And sometimes it's really hacked together in a kind of an amateur way, and it's almost like a hand built race car. And your neighbor wants to take it for a spin, but he doesn't know all the nuances and intricacies, and doesn't know that to turn it on, it's a key switch, and it's a flip, and it's to hold the gas down and pull this wire. They just expect to get in and go, and I haven't seen models that allow you to just get in and go. But what you can do relatively easily is you can take your current profit and loss, your income statement, and you can look at your expenses for, say, the trailing 12 months. And we do this in the class, but just ask yourself, which of these costs that I pay for every month are fixed and which ones are truly variable? And to me, the simple litmus test is, if my volume doubles, will this line item on my P&L cost double? Rent, as an example. If my volume doubles, unless I get a second building, my rent's not going to double. So I say rent is fixed. If my volume doubles, my headcount will probably double because I need twice as many people to get out twice as many orders, right? And you go through your whole P&L, all your expenses that way. And then you realize when you've got that fixed column of all the expenses that are essentially fixed, ask yourself, if I open a second building, will all these costs then double? And if they double, whether I've got customers in that second building or not, utility, rent, as two great examples. And then it's somewhat, now you've got a number that you've got to try to figure out how to cover with new revenue. Otherwise, you're paying for it. You're subsidizing with the margin in your existing building. And that might be the way forward, borrow money or take it from your existing business. But at least then you can kind of sketch out how long you think you will be upside down or break even. It'll help you decide kind of what your desperation price is just to get an anchor tenant in there to help contributing towards the fixed costs. But also what you'd want to charge the fill-in customers, after you've got someone kind of, normally when you open a new building, you've got someone that'll pay half the bills, an anchor tenant, right? And then you kind of break even with those guys, but you make what you can make with the other customers. And you kind of look at, well, what is the reality? I think what I found in 3PLs is we have an aversion to risk, and the idea of build it and they will come is not one that most 3PLs are willing to accept. We don't just open a building and expect that customers will come running. We wait until a customer forces us into a new building.
Yep.
We essentially calculate whether or not opening the new building for that customer will at least cover our costs, and then we profit as we fill the other half, hypothetically. So, but my little example about understanding what the fixed cost of a new building would be, even if there was no activity, what are you going to pay every month? And then if you've got some activity, just borrow people from your existing site. If it's close enough, you have to hire full staff that are going to sit around waiting for customers. You've got to understand your realities and model it the best you can. It doesn't need to be sophisticated, but it's certainly better than nothing.
Yeah, and this kind of it just reminded me of one of our clients there in Fresno, and what they did is kind of smart. Like they got this, I don't know about much about their exact location and all that, if it is ideal or not, but so they got their warehouse in this kind of a warehouse complex kind of scenario. So they are like mini warehouses, about I think each warehouse is 25 or 30,000 square feet. And so they were one of the first ones. And they started, I think, about 3 or 4 years back. I cannot remember the exact timeline. But since they were the first one, the other ones were always empty. So they piggybacked on it. And every 6 months, they kept on leasing the other one, right? So which was a very good concept I saw. And this was a new 3PL which started. And so now I think they have 8 or 9 of those, smaller warehouses, but they're in the same complex or compound, if you may, right? So they can share the labor across them, and they do primarily cross docking anyways. So, but yeah, that's a very interesting point too. If you're able to find something nearby, that helps you with that. And so that also brings me, this is an out of the blue question, which just I thought about. Are there certain resources in terms of, let's say I am a 3PL and or I'm wanting to have open my business, or I am an existing 3PL, like you mentioned something about balance sheet, looking at P&L, right? So I have my P&L in front of me. If I want to know how do I compare, let's say, to a standard, is there any way I can know that? Is there any publishing around around that, or no?
Yeah, I don't think there is. And I think what it comes down to is I think you have to look at the situation from a top-down approach. What will the market bear
Mm-hmm.
for the services that I want to sell? And let's just use, the standard warehousing, 100,000 square feet. If I charge, it sounds like everyone charges $20 a pallet, just making up a number.
Yeah.
If I charge $20 a pallet and I rent the building that's available to me today at $9 a foot a year,
Mm-hmm.
how many pallet positions do I need to create in this building, and what percent of them have to be occupied until I've broken even?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And ask yourself, do you have the tolerance for that timeline until break even occurs or when profitability occurs? So again, you might rent a building at the top of the market.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't change the fact that customers are only willing to pay $20.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The same way you might decide to buy Lamborghini forklifts, and to cover your cost, you need to charge $99 a pallet in, pallet out. No one's going to buy it.
Yeah.
Right. So cost and price, again, they're cousins. They're not married. So the game becomes, if the price will be X, what can I do to my cost so that my margin is acceptable by my standards? And that begins the pursuit of continuous improvement and specialization, so that if you don't want to be the cheapest place to get your business, but average cost, all that does is diminish margin. The trick is to find a way to sell at the market but deliver the service at a lower than average cost. And that's where automation comes in. That's where business intelligence from AWS comes in. That's where, smarter thinking from a warehouse management system or insight comes in. In some lower revenue 3PLs that maybe don't even have a warehouse management system or directed put away, they might trust the forklift driver to pick put away locations. And for all we know, they might put pallets away by color, or they want to get a workout, so they put them in the back corner on the top level because they don't want to come back to the receiving dock anytime soon, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a continuous improvement minded organization that invests in technology that will give them a payback says, you know what, the pick location is in location A01, so the put away needs to be in the second, third, or fourth level of the A aisle only. If not, maybe the B aisle, right? And then you force the next forklift move to be as short as possible. So sometimes we think that we can't afford something. You mentioned something before about, companies that want to become better at pricing can't afford to come to the pricing class. The one joke I used to always make is we don't have the time to become more efficient, right? Well, obviously, how do you dig yourself out of that? So you have to invest where the money is smart, and you have to listen to trusted advisors that will help you make smart decisions that grow your business. And not that this is a commercial for the IWA, but that's really what I found that attracted me to that organization is the membership really is out there to improve the personal experience of every member there, which in essence, we are all competitors. I call it the tide that raises all boats. And it benefits us as competitors as well, because realistically, I mentioned at the start of our conversation that the desperate will always beat the hungry.
Yeah.
And if the desperate is uninformed and he just tells a prospect, give me your best price so far and I'll beat it, he will win himself into non-existence.
Yeah.
So I would rather educate my competitors, my peers, so that we're not undercutting each other at our own detriment and to the detriment of the reputation our industry has in general, right? And so maybe this is a good time with 10 minutes left to give you my second t-shirt worthy mantra. And that is, the only thing worse than losing a good deal is winning a bad deal. And this ties into really the essence of the conversation we're having today is, what do we find out too late about, margins are being eroded and scope is creeping and we don't have a way to track it. And I do want to comment on that too in our limited time. Like we talked about in the beginning, sometimes we don't know that we're doing more from our customer than we anticipated when we quoted a price. And it might be something simple that is the customer's doing, like, hey, can you just throw in a flyer?
No. Yeah.
Can you just throw in a coupon? And those things that seem like an easy add-on are, hey, we want to add a second box now. It's not just one size anymore, or we want to try baggy. And those things take you a little bit longer. You don't want to be a pain. You want to be, supportive of your customer, and you kind of just do it. And you don't charge for it, and you don't know if you could charge for it or how do I track it, which is another subject. If you can't track it, you can't sell it. And that's foundational information for anything that you price is if you can't keep track, then you'll never be able to invoice. But some things are the customer's fault. They have cracked the scope intentionally, not to be the bad guy. It's your job for not responding with a price change. But there's things that you might actually execute that were not how you envisioned them when you solutioned in the first place. Or you haven't taken the intelligence from your system to find a better way. And I'll give you one prime example is SKU affinity. SKU affinity might be a concept familiar to many people, but not everybody. And what that says is when someone buys brown shoes, they tend to buy a brown belt. So should you store brown shoes and brown belts near each other? Or do you have belts in aisle B and shoes in aisle A, and no matter what a customer orders, you're
Yeah,
going through two aisles?
yeah,
You could do something better about that when the realities of your customer profile change. You can react and adapt to that,
yeah.
um, to your own benefit. Again, you can kind of beat the clock. Two picks doesn't need to take 2 minutes if you store items with an affinity near each other.
I mean, like, I can have like so many examples around it. And so, like, there was a customer, like, doing LED lights, right? Like, so they would store all the tubes together, all the, like, different type, like one type of SKU, like with different variation together, like same thing example, like all belts together and all that. But the reality is, no one is trying to order like brown shoe and black shoe at the same time, right?
Right.
And but I mean, also it depends, like, if it is B2B, B2C, there's like definitely a lot of variabilities. Yeah, at the same time, a lot of people want to, like, as a 3PL, they want to combine everything as a client, right? So one client stays in this location only, the other one stays here. And sometimes, like, ask them that why are you doing it, right? Like, because that is important, right? Like, if that's a B2B type of customer, you're building pallets, makes sense, like, to a certain extent. But for the most part, if it is like general storage for e-commerce, you anyways have forward pick areas, like, so a lot of people, like, are bypassing good processes because they don't have systems to accommodate those processes as well, and they just adapt as they go. And I think one thing you mentioned about, like, in the very beginning, I didn't want to cut you, but like I was laughing at that time because I say, like, problem of yesterday and tomorrow, right? Like, we always think, like, and this applies to, again, every business, not just 3PL. But if I use 3PL as an example, like, in November, December, I get a crazy volume of orders. I'm like, fuck this. I want, like, and we can use this language. People are from our industry, and, and maybe our editor can get it. But like, so like I'll be like, okay, so like, I need to change my system. I need a process. I need to do this. I want to train my people on safety. This safety incident happened, whatever. It could be 10, 20 different things. But now you go on a break, like, 31st hits, January is back, you're a little slow. You're like, okay, let me start identify things. I start identifying. Boom, a new customer comes in February. Oh, let's just focus on that first. Then like March, then April, right? And now, oh, like I'm in the mid-year. Let me look at it again. But then again, one thing after that. I think like it all comes down to priorities, like you said, right? Like, and as much as like what I hear the most is, oh, I don't have time to look at processes right now. I need to look at like this or that or whatever. Like, there are like 100 things as a business owner which comes in, especially in the small to mid-sized space, because we are trying to do so much. And but finding that time is the key. And honestly, like, I became member of IWLA this Jan, and since then I just feel that why did I not do it before? Because honestly, for me, because I'm more like a vendor partner, right? Like, for me, it was like, okay, it's one organization. I join it, we showcase our product and all that. But honestly, like, that feeling of community, I did not know. I wish I knew it 4 years back, right? Or even 10 years back, even before I got into the
Yeah.
WMS
We
space and
all
all.
want trusted advisors that are experts in their own field without being sold, and that's what you get in IWA.
Yeah, and that is why I loved it, because like I was like, okay, I know, like, maybe I have someone from my sales team go there, because that's how most organizations are. But IWLA is definitely unique, and without it being a commercial for IWLA, but I always, like, I was at Manifest, I referred like 7 people to IWLA booth because I truly believe that yes, it is a community. It is not something someone is trying to sell or buy or anything. It's about building this community of people who are in the same space. They know what they're doing and trying to help their peers without thinking of them as a competition. So that is very valuable, I feel like. And definitely I would always like go ahead and recommend IWA to anyone in the 3PL space for
Yeah, I
sure.
agree.
And even like customers of 3PL, honestly, I feel like, maybe because that is also important. Like, maybe we should, like, at IWA should also like promote a little bit there, because that is important too, to educate them, I feel. But anyway,
Yep.
like, we are kind of deviating from costing and pricing.
Yep.
But yeah, like, so I think, like, one of the analogies which you said, like, costing and pricing are cousins, right? Like, so that is kind of have been going on in my mind, like, and I think you used it back in Jan too. That has been going in my mind, like, while you kept on saying it. So I just, like, want to utilize another minute or two, like, tell me a little bit more about it, right? Like I know you have shared a lot like around those aspects in different scenarios, but as a standalone, when you think of costing, pricing, which is kind of the agenda, was the agenda and is the agenda of this episode. So let's say like I'm a 3PL owner, I hear this either today live or later on. What is one thing like I can do as an action point, let's say this week, to get better, I guess.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, we tend to win business less often on price. The price has to be right, but there has to be another motivator for the customer to pick you. And to me, I say find out what that is and create processes that make you the best or the most efficient at something that you can provide at a reasonable margin if the price doesn't change. So again, it's all about efficiency, right? If you and I both own a 3PL and you've got an automated storage or retrieval system and you can do putaways without human intervention,
Mm-hmm.
the price you charge for putaways is probably a portion of your automation investment. For me, it's a portion of my racking investment and my labor every time you ask me to do a putaway. So in essence, with the right depreciation schedule on your investment, you are probably spending less total dollars per putaway than I am because you are, human free and I'm paying
Mm-hmm.
wages. So if your cost is half of mine for putaways, then it would seem obvious that you would want to be a storage centric distribution center. And when anyone has high storage needs and low touch needs, you should be the obvious choice, because even if you sold below market for storage rates, um, that'll attract customers that have high storage needs. And if your handling price has to be a little higher, um, and customers say, "Well, I don't have that much handling. It's all truckload in,
Mm-hmm.
truckload out of pallets." Vikrant's operation is right for me. He charges $16 a pallet. Bob charges 20. My handling charge might be lower than yours. You might charge $30 an hour. I charge 26, but they don't need my service. But a guy or gal that wants kitting for Costco,
Yep.
that's his primary business, he may be attracted to me. So if that's my reality, I may want to design kitting operations that optimize efficiency so that everyone looking for high touch business sees me as the clear choice. And anyone that sees you as high touch or high storage sees you as a clear choice. We're both happy. We've both found a way to optimize our niche without dragging each other to the bottom of the pricing world.
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, like that takes me, like, so I wanted to talk to you about rate cards, like custom rate cards versus like regular rate cards. I want to talk about like, niches, like, someone like, doing B2B, getting into B2C, vice versa. Also wanted to talk about, industry wise, like, someone not handling food products, but now they are getting it. Like, there's so many, right? Like,
You know.
and you and I both knew that 1 hour would not be enough, but that maybe
Well,
like
this
gives
is
us
only
the
your second. This is only your second conversation. So once you've made the rounds with the most critical topics, let's come back and have costs and
definite.
rates part two.
Yeah, and that is what the goal is, right? Like maybe we like this gives us the opportunity that like in the next session we get more into specific. Maybe we get the opportunity to see your magic Excel file and you can share it with some people who attend, right? Like
I'll show it to people in October in Chicago if they can't wait for the next
exactly.
web conversation.
And it is like from October 20. What are the dates? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's 8, 9, and 10.
8, 9, and 10. So yeah. So well, guys, like who are watching live or anyone who watches us before October, definitely if you like what we talked about, there'll be more practical discussions, not just like situational discussion like me and Bob had today. Uh, at the conference for economics forum. So it's Bob shared with you 8, 9, and 10 October, and iwla.com is to go to. Bob is very reachable on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he would be okay if you reach out to him on LinkedIn to ask anything. I am very reachable on LinkedIn if you guys have any questions. And meanwhile, right now, we'll just take 30 seconds if anyone wants to drop anything in chat as a question before we kind of conclude this. And if we don't hear anything in 30 seconds, we'll end it. But I'll take
While
that.
we're waiting for those 30 seconds, Vikrant, let me just confirm that the class is actually October 7, 8, and 9. It's a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Friday's kind of a half day, then half day travel. But we start bright and early Wednesday, the 7th this year.
Got it. And it's in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Rosemont, technically.
Rosemont,
And
yeah.
that might be a very exciting class. We're trying to get an after hours reception at the DHL Innovation Center, which is
Oh.
right across the street from the hotel we're having the event at,
Mhm.
which would be a great place for us to have casual conversation and kind of see from one of the global biggest what they're thinking comes next.
Definitely. And I'll take the remaining, and I'm excited to be there, and I hope more people come there, right? Like more the merrier. And I'll take the last 15 seconds to thank you, Bob. Thanks a lot for all the conversations you have had with me before this and also this conversation. And definitely looking for our continued conversations. And one quick question, like, will you be at IWLA next week or?
I will. I'll be in San Antonio leaving
All right,
Friday.
so, oh, you're reaching Friday. I'm reaching Friday too. You said
Well, let's
you
get
reached.
Yeah,
You
there's a board meeting Saturday, so I'll be in all day at the board meeting. But
yeah,
we'll definitely get together and have more of the conversations we've had since we first met. I'm sure this weekend.
100%. Really excited for it. Thanks again, everyone, joining us today. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your support, and thanks again, Bob. And we'll not just end the call just real quick. I'll just stop the recording.